Welcome to the podcast. We're going to talk NASCAR for the first time in the 2024 year. The Great American Race, the Daytona 500, was held on Monday after weather delay. And we got Rod Mullins here, our NASCAR reporter for several years here on Augusta Free Press, to break it all down for us. Rod, man, it's been a little while, man. Hope you're doing okay.
Yeah, doing okay. Just, getting into I guess the feel of getting back into this whole thing again. You know, for me, Bristol's coming up pretty quick, coming up quicker than it normally has. So we're kind of getting used to that. And then also some new names with new places, however you want to define it. But it's been an interesting off season to say the least.
Yeah, I was going to say when you sent me that email about credentials for Bristol, is like, man, this is coming up soon. So we got to get in the swing of things here, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the race on Monday. It was an interesting race to say the least. Lots of lead changes. We had a big one in the last few laps that took
Right.
a number of guys out of the field. And actually, one of the guys, I guess, who was involved in a wreck ended up somehow surviving the wreck and becoming the winner, William Byron, with the checkered flag under caution. So, man, where do you want to start with breaking down how things went?
Oh gosh. Well, I guess one, the rain, they'd had torrential rains down there for like a couple of days. The Xfinity Series race got washed out. The ARCA race got moved up, moved in a different position. The truck race, they managed to get in. But I was just really doubting very seriously they were going to be able to get this race in at all, maybe even on Monday, because what they ended up doing was they ended up having to push the Xfinity Series race to after the 500 that night. And I guess that was because of weather and the way that the rain had moved in. But then I think clouds moved out and so forth, and they had some really good weather to be able to race the 500 under. But man, I'm telling you, it was a race. I was surprised, really not surprised at the pole winner, Joey Logano, because he's had a dominant car. Penske's had a dominant car here the last little bit. They won a championship last year with Ryan Blaney. But I think what surprised me was the figure that I had not really put together until just prior to the race. In 7 races, Chevrolet has not won a race at Daytona. They have qualified on the front, with Hendrick mostly qualifying on the front row and being able to come up with, the pole position. But then in the final stages of the race, they've not been able to convert and make it. Ford has won 4 races. Toyota had won 3 up until Monday night. And when the race finally finished, William Byron crossed. And it's almost like some people might say it was scripted in some ways, because Hendrick Motorsports 40th anniversary. They are at the Daytona International Speedway and stuff, racing on this, and a Hendrick driver wins the race, and William Byron. But I've got to say this: William Byron probably has emerged from this shadow that has kind of been cast over him for the last couple of years. People wondering whether or not he could win the big one, or he could get in a position to win. He was close last year with toward the NASCAR championship, coming up with it. But I tell you, you couldn't have asked for a better race for him to come through. And it was decided by inches. This is one of those things. When that caution light came out, and the caution came out on that big one right there toward the very end, they had to run it back. There are some people that thought Alex Bowman should have been the winner, or at least been named the winner. But hey, William Byron, he was there for the cause, and there for Hendrick Motorsports, picking up that win in the 66th Daytona 500.
So what was going on in that 23 car crash? I'll say because of the when the race started, I was also watching slash covering the Virginia Tech basketball game. So I had 2 TVs in my
Right.
living room, and I was darting my eyes back and forth, and I look over and I see this crash. I see all the replays during a commercial break in the basketball game. But I honestly didn't get a chance to really break down what happened. What happened there? And I know what took out among the guys taken out, Joey Logano, who led a lot of
Yeah.
this race. What
Right.
happened there?
Um, it's one of those things of where there's just not enough room. and then you're jockeying to try to get to at least the top spot. And I think what the biggest problem was that took place during the Daytona 500, you would have at times on the low part of the racetrack, you would have a bunch of cars dialed in that would be drafting around going into the turns. And then by the time they get into the turns, it's like something slowed them up all of a sudden. And then the upper row, maybe 3 rows, and the upper row toward the wall, they took over and then they would get ahead. But then when they got back to the straightaway on the back stretch, it was kind of a nip and tuck sort of thing. It was just running out of room, people getting a little bit too antsy in the closing laps of this race to try to go and make a difference, because a lot of these cars that got knocked out had a chance to try to win this race. It was a matter of who was going to go with who was going to dance with who, and who was going to tap somebody. Gosh, I saw a lot of tapping going on in this race. And I mean, they would come up behind, and then there, you would see this, and it would be a tap, and you'd see the car lunge forward just a little bit at a time. And I saw that, and I'm like, we're getting a little bit too crazy here with this whole thing. And just about at the point, I think that I switched over to find out what the score was in the Virginia Tech game, which I wished I hadn't have even seen in the first place. Um, that's when all of this happened. And when it happened, I saw the replay, and it was just, too many positions, too tight, trying to cut corners, trying to cut in where, places, and that jockeying. And this is the same thing that came up in the truck race on Friday night. They had a big, huge wreck in the truck race. And now NASCAR is trying to look at things of what are they going to have to do to be able to, I don't know, slow these trucks down or prevent them from being able to get so tight amongst one another that when one taps the other and one makes a little bump, one doesn't come out of, losing the airflow and so forth, and then the big wreck starts. With NASCAR, these guys know what's on the line. They're trying to make it a run toward the very end. But, for teams that are struggling this year, and I've got a few of them, Stewart-Haas is one of those teams that's struggling this year. Of course, they've got almost brand new personnel with the exception of Chase Briscoe returning back in the car. But, it wasn't a good race for some of these people, wasn't a good performance. Bubba Wallace, he kind of came out of it. I think it was his third consecutive top 10, something like that, in the Daytona 500. A lot of people were expecting him to kind of win this race, but, I thought he would be close, but I kind of thought that it was going to be an unknown this time, who was going to win this race.
You mentioned NASCAR looking at things. Let's talk about one thing they're looking at after this race. Fuel strategies by some teams. Take us into that. I think this was an interesting kind of engineering story here a little bit.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things of where NASCAR is kind of wondering, I think, more than anything else, how did they manage to go and do this thing with fuel mileage the other night? Because it was fuel saving, I guess, more than anything else, if you want to call it that. NASCAR took this kind of deep dive into this thing to kind of see what they're doing. They're going to be looking at it over the next little bit. It saw a lot of these drivers racing at close to just half throttle at some points. Now, when you're at Daytona, you pretty much open it up. You open it up and you go full blast through there. But it's like we were talking before we went on to record. Some of these teams were going one lap, 47 seconds, making it around the track. Next lap, still leading, but 51 seconds. They were actually losing, time out of this whole thing, but they were easing back on it to try to conserve fuel. Now, whether that's some kind of new thing in the engine, I don't know. They've got computers now in these electronic fuel injected engines. Maybe somebody has been able to solve that problem of using fuel. I don't know, but Elton Sawyer, who's the senior vice president of competition for NASCAR, said that he said this on Tuesday morning, that when they drop the green flag, they want to, more than anything else, racing as hard as they can until they drop the checkered flag. And it almost sounds to me like it's you think that these guys aren't giving it their all when they're out there on the track. I think it's pretty smart, because these guys are using strategy in there. That's one of the things that attracts me to watching NASCAR is the strategy that's involved. It's not the wrecks. It's not, going 200 miles an hour and open it flat out. It's finding ways to be able to stay in the lead pack or at least be there when that checkered flag falls. And according to Sawyer, there's some strategy in it. Like I just mentioned, they're going to take a deeper dive into the situation and the strategy that goes into it. And my bet is if that happens, NASCAR's going to probably put some kind of stipulation or something in there saying, hey, you can't do this anymore. You're not going to be able to do this. How they're going to stop the teams, I don't know, considering the kind of, oh, how can we say this? Rocky relationship some of the teams and NASCAR are having right now is I'm kind of leading you into our next story of discussion here. So,
Yeah, let's go into that then. There's been ongoing negotiations between NASCAR and the individual teams, and this
right.
is the unique part of the sports business side of NASCAR compared to the other major sports in the United States, where there's the MLBPA, the Players Association, National Basketball Players Association has a Players Association, where they collectively bargain with the league in question over lots of things. I mean, how player
Mhm.
contracts are written, how much revenue goes to the players, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Well, in NASCAR, I mean, it's pretty much NASCAR negotiates with the individual teams, and
Mhm.
the team owners want to change some of that. Take us into this.
Well, the best way to describe it is this. Back, I think, in the 50s or sometime around the 50s, maybe the 60s, the drivers got together and they thought of forming their own union. And when they started thinking about that, Big Bill France, who was the leader, the founder of NASCAR, he put his foot down and pretty much said in a roundabout way, if there's a union in this sport, I'm going to put my damn foot down and there's not going to be a sport, is what there's going to be. I'll dismantle it, I'll shut it down before they unionize it. Now, I really don't know the whole strategy behind it, but it is more than anything else a family owned stock car series. That's what NASCAR is. The Frances, although you may see Brian France out of this now, he's not as active into this whole thing as possible, but you still have Lisa France Kennedy who's involved. I mean, they still have these chair people that are there that are conducting certain business for NASCAR, but it's all done from a family oriented owned boardroom is what's happening. And so this kind of collective bargaining agreement that you're kind of hinting to with that regard of going with the individual teams, they are looking at it, and these 36 chartered teams, more than anything else, are trying to find fairness all the way across the board because they feel like maybe some teams get a little bit more preference out of it than others. I don't know. I guess that hint could be dropped probably in there by somebody like Denny Hamlin, for example. And Denny Hamlin had made a comment back a little while ago, and he says, I think the whole thing is a monopoly. And that's the way he looks at it. You kind of get shut down in different areas. You're allowed in some places, but you're not allowed in others. Now, the way that he looks at that is that might be the fact of money. You might be involved in maybe the money end of it, the negotiations and some things like that. But then some teams might be shut out on the safety end of it. And that is opening up some eyes where there's some people that's just asking the question, if we're going to have a role in this, we kind of all need to be in all of these different areas so we can kind of get an idea of what's going on. Um, each one of these teams, though, these 15 teams, they made a decision not to extend negotiating windows with NASCAR. And NASCAR chairman Jim France, although he occasionally meets with the team, but they've had a lot of things kind of going on. First, we talked about this before the end of the season last year, and that was the 7.7 billion-dollar deal that they had of media rights and so forth, Fox, NBC, Fox, NASCAR, however it's going to be. Also now coming into the picture, I believe it's going to be the WB is going to be coming into this as well. And it's also opening up the window as to what's going to happen for the future. And there's a lot of people thinking, hey, NASCAR may get to the point where they go on a pay-per-view basis.
Mhm.
And it may be an individual thing of where you want to watch a particular driver, you can watch a particular driver during the course of a race, but they are hoping to eventually take this away. Now, if they do that, that's going to change the whole landscape dramatically from what we've been used to for years, because NASCAR has always been considered a sport that's been out in front of the people for the working man. Somebody that loves to watch this, you can watch it on free TV over the air, or you can watch it on basic cable, is what you've been able to do. Now everything's a little bit different. And I think that this whole thing right here is one thing. It's kind of like, the best description I can kind of give you of this, it's kind of like the NIL agreements. Okay. That's about the best way I can look at it. And the NIL agreements are forcing changes all across the board in the NCAA. And if you don't believe that, ask Jay Wright, who used to coach at Villanova. He stepped away because he said the game's just not the game anymore. Even though he hasn't admitted it, Nick Saban walked away. There had to be something there in this NIL and the way things are and the way things are expected to be. It's the same thing in NASCAR, and the teams want to have at least a fair shot on the track, not only in a car like in the next generation car, but monetarily, and being able to be, cost effective, reimbursed, however you want to say it. They want to have a chance at having some say in it. I think the best example of this is probably the recent NASCAR promotion marketing thing that they entered into with, of all people, Crocs. That's what floored me about this. I thought, okay, I can see it for film. I can see it for, other places like it used to be, Kodak Film, the official film of NASCAR at one point or another. But they entered into an agreement, a collaboration with Crocs, where they sell 5-pack charms sold separately with these Croc shoes, and all of them are licensed specifically for NASCAR. There is no kickback to the teams, and there are no individual teams or driver charms. Who makes your money for you? It's the drivers. Who makes your money for you? The teams. If you don't have teams, you don't have NASCAR. And that's what I think they're going to have to seriously look at. And, it's still up in the air right now. So breaking it down this way, if you're used to getting $7, they want you in one way. Hey, take a step down here and get $5 out of the whole thing. You'll be happy and stuff. We still want you to get maybe 750, but we want that bigger share to come along with this increment to help us because we need your help. Well, there's been a lot of things that's hurt NASCAR in the last couple of years. COVID was one of them, but we have also seen a resurgence and ratings. Sold out Daytona 500. Some of these races were sold out going into the playoffs. It's a lot in a nutshell about this whole thing, about this revenue sharing with NASCAR and the drivers.
Yeah, NASCAR is the one of, I can think of two sports, with the other sport being UFC, that's
Hmm.
privately owned. It's owned by one entity. NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, those are all collective kind of things. Where the owners are all the owners themselves are all the owners of the league in that sense. Here you have owners, and then you have owners. You have the owners of
Hmm.
NASCAR and the owners of the teams that make up NASCAR. They employ the drivers individually. As you said, if the NFL does a marketing deal, all the teams share in that.
Hmm.
NASCAR makes a marketing deal. NASCAR, the France family gets that. If same thing with
Right.
UFC, it's the folks now. It's the folks with Endeavor, the group that merged UFC and WWE, and those are the two entities. I'll include WWE in there, sports entertainment, the three entities where the percentage of revenues that go back to the actual people who make the sport, in the case of NASCAR, the drivers, in the case of the other, UFC, the fighters, and WWE, the performers, they make a lot less of the overall share of revenues relative to the National Football League players do, MLB, NBA,
Hmm.
NHL, etc. So, man, yeah, this is And this is the future of the sport. As you noted, Rod, this is a sport that is again regaining popularity, which means more money. Um, One thing that'll divide us all is fighting over money.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about this thing with WWE because the McMahons at one time, biggest, stockholder, still kind of a family owned operation was what it was. And I know they've had a bunch of things going on in that organization. It's been like a lot of other organizations. We could talk about the Brian France situation here several years ago where, he was in the Hamptons and then he was caught kind of, one of these things, but he kind of went away quietly, still kind of involved to some degree or another with NASCAR, but he's not as involved as he was. But, teams that are struggling right now, this is where it kind of concerns me. We're back to a point of where it's almost like you have to purchase a charter to stay in the sport. Okay. It's the same way as the NFL and the owners granting permission for a city to have a specific franchise. That's kind of the way I look at it. But the owners of the cars have to put up money for charters to be able to secure numbers and to have teams. And then that's where it kind of goes out on the limb, sort of like what I've been talking about with some of my students and stuff in class. If you go and you get a .com address on the internet and it is popular, it could either go for pennies on the dollar, however you want to go, or it could go for millions of dollars if you've got the right enough slogan. Here's the thing. It's not going into the hands of the person that, really ought to be getting it. It's going into the hands of who makes that possible. In NASCAR's version of it, there's just not, to me, that revenue sharing that needs to be out there for some of these teams to kind of survive.
And I wonder too. I mean, I was thinking about this as we were started talking about this. The fact that NASCAR now it's a national sport now. When I would say
Mm-hmm.
national, it's not just Southern like it was when it started. All those years
Right.
ago. But in the South, politically, and it's still the case. But certainly when NASCAR was founded all those years ago, and now still being the case politically, the South is anti-union. I mean, most
Yep.
states, all states in the old Confederacy are right to work states, as we call them, where unions aren't, and collective bargaining and all that kind of stuff is frowned upon. So, I mean, so not only is NASCAR owned by a family, which is unique, but then, yeah, there's a anti-union bias, even though now, again, NASCAR is not just it's not a regional sport anymore, hadn't been for a
Right.
long time, but there's still that's still some holdover, it feels like to me.
Well, and the other thing too, and you're closer up there than what I am, and all about the Richmond area and what the proposal is about, the Bullets, excuse me, the Wizards
Yeah.
now coming down and so forth. The Wizards possibly coming to Virginia, this sports arena and everything, and now the unions are getting involved, and the
Yeah.
unions say it's going to be a bad move for all this stuff. Why you're going to do it? And I'm like, okay, I understand your points behind it, but you're kind of complaining, you're kind of comparing apples to oranges in this case. You're kind of going against the state that is, in essence, anti-labor or anti-union in this case. And you're going to try to defeat this. I know there's politicians that are against it and so forth, but there's people that really think, hey, we can get them down here to Richmond. Hey, this is big for Virginia. But here's the big thing, that revenue right there that's going to come into Richmond, is anybody else in the rest of the state going to benefit from it? Okay.
Well,
Revenue sharing, that's a big thing. That's where I'm coming up with it.
yeah, the big issue with that arena, proposed arena, is that one, it would be in Alexandria, so just across the
Yeah.
river from DC.
Okay. Hmm.
And I don't think it's gonna end up happening because it's 2 billion. The state would be giving the owner of the team basically $1.6 billion to build a $2 billion arena. There's a lot of
Right.
political opposition, enough political opposition, let's just say, to the amount of money that will be floated there. Because, yeah, like you said, then how much money ends up coming back to the taxpayers? I mean, you're a Virginia taxpayer, I'm a Virginia taxpayer.
Yep.
How much do we see out of that? And because we're fronting the money for a billionaire to build a couple $1 billion arena. I think there's enough opposition to that the union part of this is just another layer. Um, And so it's one of those things where public money to build big sports arenas has long since been proven not to really
Mm,
benefit the taxpayers. The taxpayers front
right.
the money, and we don't ever get paid back over the
Hmm.
many years after. And so, plus, gosh, why do they need an arena? I love that arena. I'm going to that arena, the Capital One Arena, next month for the ACC tournament. It's a pretty good
Wow.
arena. It's a
Yeah.
it's a nice place to watch basketball. But no, that all winds together. I mean, yeah, as much as yes, this podcast talks NASCAR, and we talked about the race at the start. All this stuff about the money is what makes the world go round as far as NASCAR. That's why we do it all.
Yeah, and another thing leading up, and although this is not NASCAR, but this is a sign of the changing times. I don't know if you caught it this afternoon or not. Eli Gold used to be the voice of NASCAR for such a long time and stuff. Used to host NASCAR Live on Tuesday nights for 36 years. The voice of the Alabama Crimson Tide. He's fought esophageal cancer, was cleared back in the spring last year and told he's in good health. He can do this. He was told today, pretty much by, or told just the other day by the University of Alabama, that he was no longer going to be needed anymore.
Hmm.
And it was like, okay, well, when I read the article, I first thought, okay, Eli's had this cancer. He's probably going to retire and step back from it. No, he got the voice, he got the word that said, you're out, you're gone. Now, where does that open up with all the things that are going on in the sport? And also, well, look at NASCAR too. I mean, NASCAR has a say in who your announcers are. They've got to have a say in who the announcers are. So you might get somebody up there with some unpleasant views and some things about the way NASCAR is. Preferably, I'd say that's the reason why they kept Tony Stewart at kind of arm's length, because Tony Stewart tells it like it is. You may not like him, but he tells it like it is. And probably NASCAR said, yeah, just for a couple of races, but no, hey, leave Stewart out of this. And now it's kind of been like, in one way, they've put the screws to Stewart Haas in such a way that their backs are against the wall. And Tony Stewart's like, we may even be giving up a charter. They might be giving up a charter or two by the end of this year if they do not have a good race year.
Mhm.
And that's sad that some of these teams are in that kind of situation to have to go and give up a charter to get cash flow to come in to keep that team going. And then that's not even enough. I mean, look at the thing about Legacy Motor Club. That was a thing that was supposed to be at first Richard Petty, and then the other people that had combined in there to form the partnership. Petty was going to be the ambassador, so to speak. It all gets changed when Jimmy Johnson enters. And then when Jimmy Johnson enters, they go, oh, we've got two, 7-time champions of this whole sport together, and so forth. Oh, this is going to make it even better. And then Richard Petty, who said, I didn't have a say in the matter. They end up going into a negotiation with Toyota. They drop Chevrolet about quarter of the way, or maybe halfway through the season. They say, we're going to be dropping Chevrolet and going to Toyota next year. And that's what they're driving this year. These teams are having to look at money. Who's going to provide the parts? Who's going to provide all these things that they need in order to keep them out on the track? And right now, some of them aren't getting it. They're not getting it like they used to. And at one time, Ford would spend just about every practical dollar they could and put it in and pour it into NASCAR. But now you've got teams that are looking in other places, and they're looking at other sports. Possibility, heard this the other day too. Who one of the possible teams coming into NASCAR might be that they are in negotiations with? Honda.
Hmm.
That was a little bit of a surprise for me, but I'd kind of expected it was going to be a Japanese car maker, at least along the lines. I thought, you've already got Toyota in there. Why not have somebody else? Honda was probably the best bet. But even in that sense, American companies or General Motors, they can't even get into Formula One right now because of the situation. It's money. It's, where are you going to get this from? How are you going to do this? And even if you've got the Andretti name behind you, like Michael Andretti did trying to go into F1, Formula One, it wasn't enough. and they sent a letter of rejection to them. So now I don't know. Are they going to appeal? Are they going to be into Formula One? Who knows? All this is just in this huge state of flux right now as we go into this changing atmosphere of sports in general. I mean, not just NASCAR, not just IndyCar, not just Formula One, but it's everything.
Oh,
Everything is changing really quickly.
college basketball, college football,
Mhm.
the pro ball sports. Yeah, yeah. It's all. I spend as much time writing college sports as talking about NIL and transfer portal as I do about the game sometimes. So, yeah, it's definitely an important part, and that's why it's good that we were able to talk about this on the podcast today, the business part. The fun part then is when they race and we get to watch the races, and if it
Yeah,
doesn't rain for days at a time to keep us from watching them. But yeah,
true.
this other stuff's important too. Well, Rod, this is our first NASCAR podcast of 2024. So, got that under our belt. It's my fault we didn't do a preview of Daytona. The calendar caught up to me. Too much basketball in my brain, I think.
Well, it's been a busy time for me too. I mean, it's one of those things of where I kind of got there and I started thinking, should we do something for LA and the Coliseum and stuff? I'm like, nah, it's just kind of a warm-up race and
Yeah,
stuff. It's
yeah.
not really one. But then I started thinking as we started getting closer, I started thinking, we're getting close to Daytona. Wow, this is really upon us, just like the same thing when we were talking about getting their credentials for Bristol and so forth. And then Bristol, and then I got my thing from NASCAR just the other day. It's saying, here you are, you're invited, you got to go and fill this out. And I'm like, 3 weeks, roughly about 3 weeks is what it's supposed to be. And I don't know what I'm going to be expecting when I get down there. I was just reading Crystal's article earlier, I think, on Facebook about the fact of temperatures in the 50s up there, expecting snow this weekend. We're expecting snow down here. That's perfect racing weather at Bristol, especially in March. It's going to be 50s, during the week, and then we'll get a snowstorm in on the weekend, and we'll have all the drivers and the teams out on the track making snow angels. That's what they did the last time at the big, snow that I went to. And that's the race I literally froze myself to death as a spectator. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. And then I was crazy enough to go to that Virginia Tech Virginia game and like to froze to death that night also up in Blacksburg. But
And that was in
I should have
November. It shouldn't
expected
be
that.
that cold then. I mean,
No, I know it. I
but
know. But
March, yeah.
still,
I mean, April in Bristol is a challenge
yeah,
sometimes. So March, good luck. It could be 75 degrees or it could be 30. One of the, and
it
it's
could.
probably
You
not in the
don't
middle.
know.
It's going to be one or the other.
Well, and I know you've been going through some ups and downs up there, and no bigger downer than what happened the other night. Like we were talking earlier about this podcast, talking about going between the Daytona 500 and going between the Virginia and Virginia Tech game. And I was talking to some fans that love Virginia down here, kind of follow us, kind of follow you. And they were saying, I don't know what to expect out of this team coming up. I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, and who have you got yet to play this weekend?
Oh, just North Carolina. That's
Just
all.
North
Yeah.
Carolina, so
They'll
it's
probably go out and win that game. I mean, it's
well, I know, but and I don't want to get my chickens counted before they hatch and stuff, but still, it's a scary thing. I mean, it's like, yeah, you could see this, but it's like, did I expect that big of a blowout? No. I thought that at least a team was going to show up. And it's just like, I think the common argument was today, I think when we were kind of talking, the three of us, two other teachers and myself, was this team hasn't gelled. It just hasn't gelled in certain areas and so forth. And then the thing was brought up, why doesn't, why is there any attention being paid to free throw shooting by UVA? And they've got the worst average of anybody in the country. And I'm
I
like,
think
I know I've been saying this,
they're
but
sixth worst. They're actually sixth worst in the country. There's
yeah,
362 teams, and they're sixth worst in the
yeah,
country. So they
they're
actually
one of the
literally are that
worst.
bad.
And
What's funny about this Virginia team, they've won 20 games, they've lost seven. The seven losses are all about double digits, and they're, I mean, they're bad losses. It's not if this
mhm,
team, if they win a lot of games. But if they get down, they lose.
yeah,
It's kind of like the when I was talking about the weather, it's either gonna be 75 or it's gonna snow, nothing in between. With this Virginia team, if you're watching them and they're playing well in the first half and they're ahead at halftime, they're probably gonna win. If they're
Yeah.
losing, they're going to lose, and it's more often than not that they're going to win. But man, when they lose, what's the old saying about the little girl with the curl? When she's good, but when she's bad, she's really bad. Um,
Yep.
they're really bad when they're
Yeah,
bad. So
that's just it. So I mean, it could be a hard year for the rest of the time and stuff. Don't don't start booking your press passes just yet to traveling anywhere, at least in the NCAA end of it. I mean, you might end up going to the NIT, but that might not last long. Who knows? It's anybody's guess
they're
at
gonna
this
be an
point.
NCAA team, but what I won't do is I won't book the whole weekend. Is I'll book the
Oh,
first
I
night,
know. Yeah.
and then I won't book myself back until because last year I ended up staying in Orlando for a couple extra days. Well, I mean, there's worse things to do than be in Orlando. It was warm
True.
compared to Virginia, but yeah, I don't know that I'll be thinking about going to the Final Four this year if that's the case.
Yeah, I understand that. So, but still, it's always good to talk to you about NASCAR and then also talk
Yes.
about other sports because, yeah, there's just so many different things going on and stuff. And I can't resist asking a little bit about UVA stuff, what's going on up in that part of the state and so forth. And it's always interesting hearing something and staying in touch with you and then reading stuff from Jerry and different people like that. It's always just interesting.
It all runs together too, so it really does. Hey, well, Rod, thank you for your time on this podcast. We'll talk again next week.
All right, we'll talk to you later.